How great you must have felt, looking down on me the way you did before. Tell me now, though, was it worth it? Modern Queen Tales presents Watch Me Rise. Remember to like, subscribe, and above all, enjoy. Without further ado, let's give these pages a flip. Chapter 1. The Disregarded Shadow. The Edgerton Building penthouse smelled of oxidized brass, spilled synthetic champagne, and the expensive cologne favored by Silicon Valley transplants. I gripped the handle of my industrial mop. The plastic felt slick against my calloused palms. I pushed the heavy basin of soapy water across the Italian marble floor, my gray uniform a dull stain against the glittering backdrop of the annual Diamond Corp Innovation Gala. Above me, a chandelier made of thousands of fiber optic threads pulsed with a cool blue light. The room hummed with the chatter of 100 executives, their voices echoing off the floor-to-ceiling smart glass windows that overlooked the sprawling tech district of San Francisco. They celebrated their record-breaking quarter, clinking crystal glasses and boasting about their latest data acquisition algorithms. I focused on a sticky puddle of Prosecco near the main bar. Clark Johnson, the CEO of Diamond Corp, stood 3 feet away. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that hugged his shoulders perfectly. His teeth gleamed artificially white under the halogen spotlights as he laughed at a joke made by his vice president of engineering, Tristan Soderberg. The edge computing infrastructure is bulletproof, Clark bragged, swirling the amber liquid in his tumbler. We control 90% of the city's data flow. The barrier to entry for competitors is absolute. Tristan nodded, pulling a cigar from his breast pocket. We own the cloud. We own the future. The board is ecstatic. I pushed the mop over the Prosecco spill. The wet cotton strings slapped against the marble, producing a sharp, wet sound that cut through their conversation. Clark glanced down. Disgust wrinkled his nose. He stepped back, wiping an imaginary speck of dirty water from his polished leather shoe. Careful there, he snapped, his voice dripping with condescension. That Italian marble costs more than your lifetime earning potential. I kept my head down. I wrung out the mop in the yellow plastic bucket. The gears of the wringer squealed. Tristan chuckled, lighting his cigar. The pungent smoke drifted over my head. Give her a break, Clark. She probably thinks the cloud is an actual weather phenomenon. The circle of executives erupted into laughter. The sound grated against my ears, harsh and jagged. True, Clark agreed, taking a sip of his drink. It takes a certain level of intellect to grasp what we do here. A master's degree from Stanford, minimum. The uneducated masses just clean up our messes. They keep the floors shiny while we build the digital world. I maintained my silence. I pushed the cart toward the hallway leading to the executive boardrooms. My silence was my armor. My invisibility was my greatest asset. They saw a woman in a gray uniform. They saw a high school diploma and a name tag that read Oriana. They saw nothing else. They failed to see the irony of their situation. These men, who boasted of their impenetrable digital fortresses, operated in a physical space full of glaring vulnerabilities. I maintained their smart offices. I cleaned the biometric scanners on the server room doors. I saw the sticky notes with complex alphanumeric passwords clinging to the undersides of their ergonomic keyboards. I emptied the shredder bins and found improperly wiped flash drives tossed casually into the trash. They relied on invisible labor to function, completely ignoring the access that labor granted. I pushed my cart into the main boardroom. The room lay empty, silent, and cast in the shadows of the city below. The massive mahogany table stretched across the center of the room, surrounded by plush leather chairs. I sprayed a mist of citrus-scented industrial cleaner onto the polished wood. I wiped the surface in slow, deliberate circles. Through the glass wall, I stared out at the tech district. The skyscrapers blinked with thousands of lights, Massive servers processing exabytes of data every second. They owned the skyline. They dictated the flow of information. They mocked the people who polished their desks. I wiped away a smudge from the mahogany. I placed my hand flat against the cold wood. A vow formed in my mind, crystallizing into a hard, unbreakable diamond. I would take this room. I would take this building. I would strip them of their wealth, their infrastructure, and their unearned arrogance. I would buy the very floor they stood on, and I would make them look me in the eye when I did it. Chapter 2. The Quiet Accumulation. My sanctuary occupied a 10 by 10 utility closet on the sub-basement level of the Egerton building. Pipes hissed overhead, carrying steam and chilled water to the server farms on the upper floors. The air smelled of lavender and bleach. I finished my shift at 3 in the morning. I locked the closet door from the inside and pulled a canvas chair from behind a stack of toilet paper boxes. I retrieved my workstation, a discarded heavy-duty laptop I had pulled from the Diamond Corp e-waste bin 3 months prior. I had replaced the fried motherboard with parts ordered from back-alley electronics suppliers and installed a lightweight Linux distribution. The glow of the screen illuminated my face. I opened my code editor. The transition from manual labor to digital mastery required discipline. I slept 4 hours a day. During my 8-hour cleaning shifts, I listened to audiobooks on network architecture and edge computing. During my night hours in the closet, I put that theory into practice. I utilized open-source AI frameworks to build my foundation. I trained neural networks on the slow, sluggish Wi-Fi provided to the building's maintenance staff. My initial models were clumsy, crashing my rebuilt laptop multiple times a night. I persisted. I debugged the code line by line. I mastered Python, C++, and the complex architecture of large language models. Knowledge lay scattered everywhere. The tech district hemorrhaged information. They called it trash data. Server load logs, discarded metadata, discarded beta testing metrics, and unencrypted router traffic. The executives viewed this data as worthless exhaust. I viewed it as a gold mine. I built a scraping algorithm. I deployed it onto a hidden partition of a guest network router I had physically accessed during a cleaning shift. The algorithm siphoned the trash data, compiling millions of data points regarding Diamond Corp's server loads, their peak trading times, and their algorithmic investment strategies. I fed this data into my AI model. The neural network found the patterns. It identified the exact moments when Diamond Corp's servers lagged due to poor thermal management, a flaw I knew intimately because I cleaned the dust from their failing cooling vents. I used these insights to predict fractional drops in their stock price and the prices of their competitors. I opened a brokerage account under an LLC I formed online. I named the company Athena Core. I started with $200. I made micro investments, shorting tech stocks based on the server lag predictions my AI generated. $200 became $2,000. $2,000 became $20,000. The strategy required patience. I operated in the shadows. Athena Core remained a faceless entity, a string of code executing trades in the milliseconds before the market registered the data drops. The 2025 market dip arrived in late October. A critical flaw in a widely used cloud security protocol caused a massive panic. Tech stocks plummeted. Diamond Corp lost 20% of its valuation in a single afternoon. The district bled capital. I watched the red lines streak across my screen in the utility closet. Athena Core sat on a substantial pile of liquid capital, insulated from the crash by aggressive short positions I had taken weeks prior. The dip presented the perfect opportunity. Major tech firms, desperate to stop the bleeding, began shedding physical assets. They sold off secondary data centers, cooling towers, and backup generator farms at a fraction of their value. They believed the future lay entirely in virtual software. They forgot that the cloud requires a physical anchor. I directed Athena Core to buy. I purchased distressed data centers on the outskirts of the district. I bought failing server farms in Oakland and San Jose. I structured the purchases through a labyrinth of shell corporations, obscuring my identity behind layers of legal paperwork and automated holding companies. I acquired the physical hardware the district desperately needed to stay afloat. I traded my mop for a keyboard, building an empire of silicon and steel from the damp confines of a sub-basement closet. I owned the concrete boxes that held their precious data. Chapter 3. The Calculated Siege. Athena Core transitioned from a passive scavenger to an apex predator. The tech district relied on a vast, subterranean network of fiber optic cables to transmit data between their corporate headquarters and the remote server farms. The city owned these primary fiber optic corridors. In November, facing a massive budget deficit, the city council announced the privatization and auction of these underground lines. Diamond Corp and their rivals formed a consortium to bid on the lines. They expected a standard bidding war among the usual players. They drafted conservative budgets, assuming their collective power would secure the infrastructure. They underestimated the shadow entity. I unleashed the full financial weight of Athena Core. I bypassed the standard bidding process. I utilized an obscure municipal loophole, offering the city a massive upfront cash payment that wiped out their deficit in a single stroke. The city council approved the sale in a closed-door emergency session. Athena Core became the sole owner of the district's primary fiber optic network. I owned the veins through which their digital blood flowed. The calculated siege began immediately. Diamond Corp's lease for bandwidth usage expired on a Tuesday. At 9 a.m., my automated system sent a standard renewal notice to Diamond Corp's billing department. I raised their bandwidth tariff by 5,000%. Panic rippled through the Egerton building. I pushed my cleaning cart down the executive hallway, watching the chaos unfold through the glass walls. Junior executives sprinted between offices, clutching tablets and sweating profusely. Phones rang incessantly. I polished the brass handle of the main boardroom door. Inside, Clark Johnson slammed his fists onto the mahogany table. His face was a mottled, angry red. Tristan Soderbergh paced the length of the room, pulling at his hair. "Who the hell is Athena Core?" Clark yelled, his voice carrying through the thick glass. "Find out who owns this shell company. They are holding our entire infrastructure hostage. We can't process a single transaction without those fiber lines." "We're trying, Clark," Tristan shouted back. "They are completely insulated, registered in Delaware, routed through holdings in the Caymans. Our lawyers are hitting a brick wall. We have 48 hours before they throttle our bandwidth to zero. We'll be dark." "Get them on the phone," Clark demanded, pointing a trembling finger at the speakerphone on the table. "Offer them equity. Offer them double the old rate. Set up a meeting. Now." I smiled, a tight, cold expression. I finished polishing the handle. At 1 p.m., an email arrived in Clark's inbox. Athena Core accepted the meeting. The anonymous CEO would arrive at the Egerton building boardroom at 3 p.m. to discuss the new lease terms. I retreated to a vacant office on a lower floor. I stripped off my gray uniform, folding it neatly and placing it in my cleaning cart. I retrieved the garment bag I had smuggled in that morning. I put on a tailored, midnight blue suit. The fabric felt sharp and heavy against my skin. I slipped into black leather stilettos. I pinned my hair back into a severe, professional knot. I picked up a single, black USB drive containing the foreclosure documents and the revised bandwidth contracts. At 2:58 p.m., I stepped onto the executive floor. The receptionist, a young man who usually ignored me completely, stared at me with wide eyes. "May I help you, ma'am?" "I am here for the 3 o'clock meeting with Mr. Johnson." I said, my voice steady and commanding. I walked past him, pushing open the heavy doors to the main boardroom. Clark Johnson, Tristan Sodenberg, and 3 other board members sat around the mahogany table. They looked up, expectant, nervous, ready to negotiate with a ruthless corporate titan. Their expressions morphed from anticipation to confusion, and finally, to a horrified, paralyzing shock. Clark stood up slowly. The color drained from his face. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. He recognized the eyes. He recognized the face of the woman he had mocked over spilled Prosecco. "You," Tristan whispered, dropping his pen on the floor. I walked to the head of the table. I placed the black USB drive onto the polished mahogany surface. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," I said, meeting Clark's terrified gaze. "I am Oriana Carlyle, CEO and sole proprietor of Athena Core. We have a bandwidth contract to discuss." Chapter 4. Total District Dominance. The meeting lasted exactly 4 minutes. I could have negotiated. I didn't. I presented the terms. Diamond Corp owed Athena Core $200 million in immediate back tariffs for the uncontracted data they had pushed through my fiber optic lines over the past 12 hours. They lacked the liquid capital to pay. I offered a solution, a total buyout of Diamond Corp's physical assets, including the deed to the Egerton building, in exchange for debt forgiveness. Clark threatened legal action. He threatened to call the police. He threatened to destroy me. I tapped the USB drive. Every illegal data harvest, every breached privacy protocol, and every instance of corporate espionage Diamond Corp has engaged in over the last 5 years is documented on this drive. I pulled the data from the trash you thought you deleted. Sign the deed, Clark, or I send this to the SEC. He signed. His hand shook so violently he tore the paper. The systematic takeover of the skyline began the next morning. Construction crews arrived at dawn with industrial laser cutters and heavy-duty cranes. I stood on the street corner, drinking a black coffee, watching the massive metal letters of the Diamond Corp logo detach from the top of the skyscraper. They fell toward the street, guided by thick cables, until they rested on flatbed trucks. By noon, the new letters ascended, a sleek silver C, followed by ARLILE. The Carlyle Tower now anchored the tech district. Total dominance required more than a name change. It required a systemic dismantling of the old power structure. I fired the entire executive board of Diamond Corp by 5 p.m. I dissolved the middle management layers populated by men with Ivy League degrees and 0 practical coding experience. I implemented a strict, uncompromising meritocracy. Degrees meant nothing in the Carlyle Tower. Resumes detailing fraternity connections and legacy admissions went straight into the shredder bins, the same bins I used to empty. We hired based on raw skill and grit. I instituted blind coding tests. I recruited the self-taught engineers, the open-source contributors, and the night shift technicians who kept the servers running while the executives slept. I promoted the invisible workforce. The building filled with people who knew how to build, repair, and innovate, rather than people who only knew how to delegate and boast. 2 weeks after the takeover, my new head of human resources sent me a message. "We have a walk-in applicant for the junior systems administrator position. You might want to see this." I checked the lobby security feed on my monitor. Clark Johnson sat in the waiting area. He wore a cheap, off-the-rack suit that fit him poorly. He clutched a leather portfolio tightly to his chest. His posture slumped. The arrogance that once radiated from him had evaporated, replaced by the desperate anxiety of a man facing genuine ruin. I pressed the intercom button. "Send him up to my office." 5 minutes later, Clark walked into the penthouse suite. The room no longer smelled of synthetic champagne. It smelled of fresh coffee and lavender. I sat behind the massive mahogany desk. Clark stopped a few feet away. He refused to meet my eyes. He stared at a spot on the wall behind me. "Miss Carlyle," he said, his voice strained and quiet. "I am submitting my application for the junior admin role." I opened his file on my tablet. I scrolled through the pages. "You have a master's degree in business administration from Stanford Clark. You have 10 years of executive leadership experience." "Yes," he replied, a tiny flicker of his old pride returning to his voice. "However," I continued, closing the file, "you failed the preliminary blind coding test. You do not understand the basic architecture of our new edge routing protocols. You lack the practical skills required to maintain the server hardware." He clenched his jaw. "I can learn. I managed the people who built those systems. Managing is not doing," I said, leaning forward. "This company requires builders. We require people who understand the foundation, not just the penthouse view." I placed my hands flat on the desk. "Your application is denied, Clark. You lack the necessary qualifications for this enterprise." He stood frozen for a long moment. He looked down at the floor, the same Italian marble he once told me cost more than my life. He turned around and walked out of the office, his footsteps heavy and defeated. I watched the heavy wooden door click shut. I felt no grand surge of vindictiveness. I felt only the cold, satisfying click of a puzzle piece locking securely into its rightful place. Chapter 5: Legacy of the New Elite. The 2026 fiscal quarter closed with unprecedented profit margins. The tech district, once a monolithic boys' club of inherited wealth and elite connections, morphed into a dynamic hub of unconventional talent. The Carlyle Tower served as the beating heart of this new ecosystem. My meritocratic hiring system triggered a wave of social mobility the city had never witnessed. We funded boot camps for lower-income neighborhoods. We provided massive grants to self-taught developers. We proved that innovation thrives in the trenches, not just in the ivory towers. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse office, looking out over the district. Rain streaked the smart glass, blurring the neon lights of the city below. The servers on the lower floors hummed, a deep, rhythmic vibration that I felt through the soles of my shoes. It was a familiar feeling. It was the same vibration I felt in the sub-basement utility closet, the heartbeat of the digital world I now controlled. The power dynamic had fundamentally shifted. The old guard, the venture capitalists and the legacy CEOs, attempted to boycott Athena Core in the early months. They tried to build alternative networks. They failed. They lacked the fundamental understanding of the hardware that we possessed. They spent decades abstracting the technology away, moving everything to the cloud, forgetting that the cloud is just a computer sitting in a building. I owned the buildings. I owned the computers. They eventually crawled back, signing my contracts, paying my tariffs, and operating under my rules. They learned a brutal, unforgiving lesson about the true nature of power in the digital age. Intelligence is not defined by a piece of parchment from a prestigious university. It is not defined by the cut of a suit or the ability to speak confidently in a boardroom. Intelligence is the ability to observe, to adapt, and to conquer. It is the grit required to sit in a damp closet at 3 a.m, piecing together discarded code until it forms a weapon. I poured a cup of coffee and walked back to my desk. I pulled up the global data flow metrics on my main monitor. Green lines pulsed across the map, representing the exabytes of information flowing through the fiber optic veins I controlled. The old guard made a fatal miscalculation. They demanded invisibility from their workforce. They wanted silent ghosts to clean their floors, empty their trash, and maintain their systems. They failed to realize that ghosts see everything. Ghosts hear every secret. And when a ghost finally decides to make herself solid, she brings the entire house down with her. They called me an uneducated maid. They dismissed me as a shadow. Now, I cast the shadow over the entire district. I sat down in the leather chair, took a sip of my coffee, and began to draft the acquisition plans for the European data corridors. The siege was over. The reign of the new elite had just begun. The end.
If you enjoyed this quick escape, hit the subscribe button for new stories twice a week. Until then, I'll see you at the next flip of the pages.